Do you know how many women are mistaken for love when all they did was reflect a man's deepest wound? It's a silent epidemic, the kind that isn't spoken about in movies or whispered between friends. A woman enters a man's life, not with fireworks or grand declarations, but with eyes that see. She doesn't need to touch him to reach him. Her presence alone is enough to fracture the illusion he's been gripping onto since boyhood. The illusion that he is whole, that he is in control, that he has outrun his shadow. She smiles, and something in him remembers. She speaks, and something in him recoils. Not because she hurt him, but because she sees him. The parts he hides, the fears he denies, the boy beneath the armor of the man. He didn't fall in love with her. He fell into her, into the echo chamber of his unresolved past, into the abyss of everything he thought he had conquered. She was not soft in the way he wanted. She was soft like water, the kind that erodes stone and exposes the sediment beneath. She didn't chase. She didn't plead. She simply stood still. And in that stillness, she mirrored every crack in his emotional foundation. Most men don't want to be loved. Not truly. They want to be adored. They want to be seen through the lens of fantasy, untouchable, strong, admired. But when a woman comes along who sees the frightened child beneath the bravado, when her gaze penetrates the performance and lands in the soul, it shakes him. Not because she's cruel, but because she's real. The feminine mirror is not always gentle. It doesn't soothe his ego. It doesn't entertain his delusions. It reflects. And what it reflects is the raw, unfiltered truth, the gaps in his integrity, the places where he abandoned himself long before anyone else ever could. He cannot love her for this. Not right away, because love requires readiness, and readiness requires humility. A humility few men are trained to carry. He may say she was too much, but what he means is she was too revealing. He may label her as cold, detached, or mysterious, but what he's naming is his own discomfort in the presence of something he cannot possess. For she cannot be possessed. She belongs to herself, and that terrifies him. Her independence is not a rebellion. It is a return to essence. She does not seek validation. She embodies it. She does not perform to be loved. She remembers that she is love. Some women are not here to be loved in the traditional sense. They arrive to awaken. They are not dream girls, they are the dream breakers. They crack the illusions men hold on to like lifeboats. Illusions about what love should feel like, what women should be, and who they themselves are beneath the curated masks of masculinity. She doesn't conform to expectation, she reveals the falsity of it. Her very being says, "I will not make myself small to soothe your fear." And in saying that, not in words but in vibration, she challenges his very identity. To the unready man, she is a threat. To the brave man, she is a turning point. The irony? He will miss her long after she is gone. Not for what she gave him, but for what she awakened in him. She will become the silence in his room, the phantom in his dreams, the ache in his chest, when another woman smiles but doesn't see, because she saw. And in her seeing, he glimpsed what it meant to be whole. If only for a moment, if only in proximity. She was not the woman he loved. She was the mirror he feared. Because love, real love, requires death. The death of the ego, the death of the fantasy, the death of control. And not every man is ready to die that death. So instead of surrendering, he runs. Not from her, but from what she represents. Evolution. She was the beginning of his becoming. And that kind of woman is unforgettable. But when he ran, he told himself a story, as most men do when faced with the unbearable weight of self-confrontation. He told himself she was too independent, too intense, too unwilling to compromise. He wrapped his avoidance in the language of logic, in words like boundaries and timing, as if growth had anything to do with comfort, as if timing ever aligned with transformation. What he could not admit, not even to himself, was that he did not leave her. He fled from the version of himself she demanded simply by existing, a version that required him to feel more deeply than he ever had to unearth what had been buried beneath years of pretending. You see, the feminine does not heal through explanation. It heals through vibration, and her energy, undiluted, unapologetic, unattached, was not something he could intellectualize. She didn't ask for his past. She felt it. She didn't demand his story. She read it in his hesitation, in his glances, in his attempts to dominate or detach. And he, like many, mistook her sensitivity for weakness, until it dismantled him. Because when a man has spent years projecting power, the woman who refuses to bow forces him to question his throne. She doesn't fight him. She disarms him. Not through war, but through awareness. And awareness is far more threatening than any weapon, for it reveals not only what is false, but what could be true, if he had the courage to surrender to it. He may have thought she was fragile, but the truth is she was forged in silence, built in shadows, sculpted from the broken pieces of her own becoming. And so, when he tried to test her, to push her, to spark a reaction, she did not collapse. She observed calmly, as if his chaos was familiar, as if she had met it before in her own mind, and had learned how to walk through fire without burning. That's the kind of woman he feared. Not the dramatic one, not the pleading one, not the one who begged to be chosen. No, he feared the woman who already had chosen herself. The one who could love him without needing him. The one who could adore him and still walk away when respect disappeared. Because such a woman could not be manipulated. She wasn't there to play his game. She was there to end it. And deep down, he knew. He knew the moment she looked at him with softness, not submission. He knew when her voice didn't tremble in the face of his withdrawal. He knew when she didn't try to change his mind, because she trusted her own. That's what cut him. That's what lingered. The fact that her power wasn't loud, but anchored. Not in anger, but in truth. In every man exists two forces, the persona and the shadow. The persona is who he tries to be, stoic, successful, detached, admired. The shadow is what he hides, the wounds, the insecurities, the unmet needs of a forgotten boy. And the rare woman who walks into his life with soul instead of strategy touches both. She sees the mask and the man behind it. She speaks not to his ego, but to the parts he's buried. And while that feels like intimacy to the conscious mind, to the unconscious, it feels like war. So he retreats, convinced that what he needs is someone simpler, easier, more validating. But what he doesn't understand yet is that every future woman he meets will either reflect his fantasy or remind him of her. There is no unseeing the truth. There is no unknowing the self once it's been stirred. And the truth is this: he never loved her. Not because she wasn't lovable, but because he hadn't yet learned how to love himself. What he called love was a craving for comfort. What he called connection was a projection of potential. And what he called fear was awakening. But she didn't wait. The mirror does not follow the one who runs from reflection. It simply returns to stillness, ready for the next soul brave enough to face themselves in it. She will love again, not as a reaction, but as an offering. Because she knows now, her love is not medicine for broken men. It is fire for those who are ready to be reborn. And while he carries on, surrounded by distractions dressed as affection, she becomes quieter, not in voice, but in presence. She no longer echoes in his messages. She no longer waits in the corners of his life. The part of her that once softened to meet him where he stood has reclaimed its height, returned to its mountain. And from that elevation, she no longer sees him as a man who abandoned her, but as a man who abandoned himself. For she understands now, not all wounds are hers to heal. Not every ache needs tending. Some are meant to burn through their own unraveling. Some men must collapse under the weight of their illusions before they will ever learn to stand in truth. And she, the woman who once longed to help him reach himself, has learned that love without self-love is not devotion. It is self-betrayal. So she lets go. Not with bitterness, not with vengeance, but with reverence. The kind of release that feels like prayer. The kind that says, I honor the lesson, but I will not linger in the classroom. And he, in his own unraveling, may one day return, not in body, but in realization. Perhaps years from now, when life has stripped him of his defenses, when his heart no longer trembles at vulnerability, when he is no longer afraid of being seen, he will remember her, not as the one who hurt him, but as the one who revealed him. And he will wonder what might have been had he chosen the mirror instead of the mask. But by then, she will have become more than he ever imagined, because women like her do not pause for those unwilling to rise. She has not waited in silence. She has grown in it. She has danced with her own shadows, mothered her own pain, and turned her ache into architecture. She has learned that her magic was never in being chosen. It was in choosing herself again and again, even when it broke her open. What he feared in her was not power, it was presence. The kind of presence that demands honesty without a single word. The kind of presence that cannot be seduced, bought, or convinced. She didn't need to raise her voice to raise the standard. And in doing so, she revealed how low his own had been. You see, some women are not here to complete men. They are here to call them into their truth, into their capacity, into their highest form. And most will not answer, Bill. Most will flinch at the sound of her call because it threatens the scaffolding of their identity. They do not want to build. They want to borrow. But she has nothing to lend that will diminish her light. She is done dimming. And this is what makes her unforgettable, not her beauty, not her kindness, not even her love, but the way she held a mirror without judgment. The way she offered him a glimpse of who he could become if only he would stop running. She didn't chase, didn't cry, didn't collapse. She simply stood, whole, grounded, unwavering. And in doing so, she became the most dangerous kind of woman. The kind a man cannot forget because she didn't ask to be remembered. She asked to be met. She was the rite of passage he declined, the doorway he walked past, the transformation he postponed. And now, her absence has become his greatest teacher. The silence between them louder than any goodbye. Because the truth is, when you walk away from the mirror, you don't escape what you saw. You carry it everywhere. In every lover's gaze, in every quiet moment, in every dream that feels like a memory. And still, she does not look back. Because the woman who has become her own sanctuary no longer waits for a man to worship her reflection. She becomes the temple, and only those who come with reverence may enter. There is something unspeakably sacred about a woman who has met herself in the depths, who has stood at the edge of her own ruin, and refused to fall back into the arms of comfort. This woman, this mirror, is no longer just a reflection of what others hope to see. She has transcended the role of muse, of fixer, of fantasy. She is no longer a reaction to someone else's desire, no longer a stage for a man to perform his half-formed idea of intimacy. She is the witness, the test, the initiation. And that is precisely why he feared her. Because she was not fooled by his surface. She didn't celebrate his performance. She didn't validate his avoidance. She stood across from him, whole and unblinking, and said nothing. And that silence spoke louder than praise. In her gaze, he met the part of himself he had always managed to silence. The wounded, the wild, the lost. And in place of applause, she offered presence. Not the kind that soothes, the kind that strips. The kind that reveals the hollowness beneath the applause he'd grown addicted to. You cannot fake your way into the soul of a woman who's done her shadow work. He tried to impress, to project, to control the narrative, But with each layer of performance he shed, she didn't respond with flattery. She responded with stillness, with calm, with truth. Because the healed feminine does not overextend to prove her love. She does not dance for scraps. She does not soften her truth just to be embraced. Her love is not decoration, it is direction. And for a man used to being adored for fragments of himself, her wholeness felt like rejection. But it wasn't. It was invitation, an invitation into authenticity, into presence, into surrender. But he wasn't ready, not for her fire, not for her depth, not for her standards. So he did what wounded men do. He called her too much when in reality she was just enough to reveal he was not yet whole. This is the great tragedy. Not that she left, but that he didn't rise. Because she would have stayed, not for perfection, but for truth, not for bravado, but for bravery. All she needed was a man who could meet her, not in the fantasy, but in the work of peeling back the ego, of owning the wounds, of sitting in discomfort without reaching for distraction. But he mistook her challenge for criticism, her clarity for coldness. And so he fled. The irony? He will chase versions of her in every woman who follows. He will search for that spark, that edge, that presence, only to find it diluted, compromised, or incomplete. Because a woman like her does not repeat herself. She does not return in disguise. She comes once as a threshold. You either cross it and transform, or you stay behind and mourn what you never truly embraced. He didn't understand that the feminine is not here to complete the masculine. She is here to catalyze it. To burn through the lies, he tells himself. To ignite what's asleep. To mirror what's missing. And yes, that hurts. But growth is always painful. Evolution always costs something. And in this case, the cost was her. Because while he hesitated, she healed. While he circled, she soared. While he doubted, she detached. And now her absence isn't just a memory. It's a monument. A reminder of what was offered and declined. A silent echo of the life he could have lived had he said yes to the mirror. But her story doesn't end in his silence. It continues in her becoming. She is not bitter. She is not closed. She is not guarded. She is simply clear. Clear on her worth, clear on her path, clear on the kind of love that does not require shrinking. She will love again, more fiercely, more wisely, more freely, but never again at the expense of her soul. She was never the woman he loved. She was the mirror he feared. And while he may spend a lifetime trying to find her in other eyes, she is already gone, not in disappearance, but in transcendence. She is the woman he will try to summon in the arms of another. Not consciously, not deliberately, but in the small, quiet ways that longing creeps in. A scent that doesn't match, a voice that doesn't echo, a depth that refuses to meet his. He will search for her in the softness of others, only to realize softness without strength feels hollow. He will crave the mystery, but recoil when he senses the weight of it. Because he never learned how to hold what was sacred without trying to control it. And yet she no longer exists in the realm of being held. She has become her own container, shaped not by the hands of a lover, but by the fire of her own reckoning. She is the product of every goodbye that didn't break her, of every silence that didn't drown her. She has buried versions of herself that once begged, once softened too quickly, once accepted less. She has grieved the girl who waited, the girl who performed, the girl who mistook attention for devotion. That girl is gone now, and in her place stands a woman who walks with her own name on her lips, unshaken, unwanting, unafraid. The woman he feared was not made of mystery, she was made of memory, of truths he never faced, of mirrors he always avoided. And now, as he moves through a world full of noise, he cannot escape the quiet she left behind, because real presence doesn't vanish. It lingers. In the rhythm of a song, in the stillness after laughter, in the gaze of someone who almost understands. He will think of her in moments he cannot explain, not because he misses her, but because something in her demanded he meet himself. And he never did. For the masculine that has not met his own soul cannot stand in the light of a woman who has. He will shrink, he will resist, he will retreat into false power, thinking dominance is strength. But dominance is only fear wearing armor, and she saw through it. She always did. She never wanted to break him. She wanted to meet him. But meeting someone where they are requires they show up. And he never truly did. He sent projections. He sent ghosts. He sent curated fragments of self, hoping that would be enough. But she was not there for fragments. She was there for fusion, the sacred kind, the kind that burns through illusion and resurrects truth. But resurrection requires death, and he feared that most. The death of the boy who seeks approval, the death of the performer who fears rejection, the death of the man who believes he must be enough to be loved, well, rather than real. But she would have loved him in his becoming. She would have stood beside him, not as a crutch, but as a flame. She would have held space, not to coddle his comfort, but to call out his greatness. Because love, true love, does not flatter the ego, it disrupts it. And she loved him truly, fiercely, but never at the expense of herself. And this is the paradox of the awakened feminine. She will give you everything if you can meet her in your truth. But if you come with masks, with manipulation, with fantasy, she will become everything you cannot hold. Not to punish you, but to protect herself. For she has learned that giving herself to someone who fears her essence is a slow death of the soul. And she has already died once. In the silence, in the waiting, in the hoping that someone would meet her as she is. She will not die again. Not for anyone. And now, while he sleeps beside someone who does not see him, while he walks through days untouched by real connection, she will rise. She will laugh. She will build. She will love again. Not because she needs to, but because she chooses to. Because she's no longer afraid of being too much. She knows now. Too much is just what the unhealed call what they cannot contain. She was the mirror he feared, because to love her would have required loving himself, and he wasn't ready. But she was. And so, her story does not end in his absence. It begins there. Because absence is not emptiness when it becomes space for expansion. She has filled that space with breath, with depth, with the kind of silence that no longer waits but listens to her intuition, to her soul, to the quiet call of becoming. She does not return to the places she had to heal from. She blesses them, she thanks them, and she moves forward, not as a woman undone, but as a woman redefined. He will wonder how she became this, radiant, still, unshaken. He will watch from afar as she blooms in ways he cannot comprehend, mistaking her softness for fragility once again, never realizing it was forged in battle. Not with him, with herself. The greatest love stories are not the ones we write with others, but the one we finally write with the self we once abandoned to be chosen. And she has rewritten hers. There is no resentment in her, no lingering bitterness, no secret desire for revenge. She is not interested in watching him suffer. That would require her to look back, and she no longer walks in that direction. She walks in truth, in light, in fire, and in the sacred solitude that no longer feels like punishment, but protection. She is not the woman you return to for comfort. She is the woman you become when you finally choose to awaken. For the love she offered him wasn't rooted in need. It was rooted in vision, and he couldn't see it because he was still trying to be seen. And now the world may praise him. They may say he moved on, that he leveled up, that he grew. But in the quiet places he won't admit to. When he cannot sleep, when success feels hollow, when his mind drifts, he will remember. Not her name, not her touch. But that feeling, the haunting knowing that someone once stood before him with love too real to perform, and he turned away, and it will sting, not as regret, but as echo. because the soul knows when it has bypassed its turning point. He will go on, but something will always feel unfinished, because love, the kind that transforms, only comes once in that form. And when missed, it does not return. It evolves. And so she walks, not into someone else's arms, but into her own. She is the storm and the stillness, the question and the answer. She is not the woman he loved. She is the mirror he feared, the mirror he broke, the mirror that survived. Now she reflects only herself. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.